Welcome to the Wing Life Podcast, where we talk about wing foiling and the lifestyles of those who enjoy this great sport. All right, fellas. Marty, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. With a pleasure.
What an opportunity to talk about foiling. I'm in the basement. My wife doesn't want to talk about foiling. My kids roll their eyes. You guys are like, hey, you want to talk about foiling for 2 hours? Yes.
Sure. Come talk foiling, bro.
Nice. So for you guys that are tuning in at home and don't have a video feed right now or listening to the podcast, we have Marty, who's a board maker out in Western Canada, and he's sitting in his basement, which is a huge rack of boards, and he's got his toque on, and he's just joining us for this episode here.
Very good. Looking really Canadian.
Whatever it takes, eh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. How long have you been doing this, Marty?
When you say this, define this.
Board making, board repairing, and we can go into how long you've been
Board
foiling
sporting.
and playing in the wind after. Yeah.
Well, how about we just start with the water part of things, and I can kind of go from there.
Sure.
I was 19, I guess. I'm 47 now. 48 in a couple weeks, and I went to Mount Royal College for the outdoor pursuits program, and started whitewater kayaking. And it leads into this. And so for me, I was like not going to get a regular job. There's no way. I'm not going to give in to the man, and I'm going to live a life of freedom. And I did for a long time. And part of that was moving to the Sea to Sky corridor, and I lived in Pemberton, predominantly in Whistler, sort of a bit back and forth. And ended up hooking up with a crew of guys there, and we started working on like trucks, 4x4s and stuff, eh? And because that was a big thing back there, because there's no gates. All the communities, all the back roads are gated here on the island, because it's like a grandfathered thing. The companies actually own the leases.
Okay.
The land. And started doing a lot of body work. And so body work is, you're working with polyester resin and fiber, and it's filling materials and sanding, and away you go. And that was kind of the beginning of like working with composites for me.
Okay.
So that goes a long ways back. As far as fixing boards, like as soon as I moved out here, which would have been, I think maybe 15 years ago. When I say here, south, that'd be the South Island. I was bored. My neighbor's board. He gave me an old wetsuit and a couple smashed up old boards and said, "Have at her, man." And I was like, "Well, I can fix that." And so I started doing my own repairs, and they were terrible. Like it was just pouring resin on, and just sanding, and like wrong kinds of resin, and the whole thing, right?
Nice.
But I started developing some points of reference anyways, like on what not to do, and which is equally as important as knowing what to do. Maybe more
At
so.
least.
Maybe more so sometimes. Eh?
Yeah.
And then it would have been about maybe a decade ago when we were kiteboarding, and we were kiteboarding a lot, and there's a bunch of spots on the island, like from the west coast all the way around the south tip and then up the east coast. It's all rocky. It's all rocky. And so, you're leashless kiteboarding with surfboards, and your boards are going to the beach all the time. And our gear was just getting trashed, and it was getting expensive to go to the shops. So started fixing my gear again. And then I started fixing everybody else's gear. And then the guy that actually owned the shop that did all the repairs in town, they stopped doing repairs, and I was the only guy. So it kind of worked out with the COVID thing. It sort of coincided with that. So I ran the flag off the pole, and it basically opened for business, and started taking people in as actual customers. That would have been maybe 5 years ago. 4 years ago. But previous to that, it was like we were fabricating our own stuff already, like right off the bat. We're like, you guys love this, like this one, especially Tom. we're going to save some money and we're going to make our own stuff.
Yeah. We'll save some time as well while we're at it.
Yeah, that part of things didn't work out how I anticipated.
Yeah.
That's okay though. But
that's a long answer to a short question.
No, I appreciate it.
No, but it
So I
does
guess
bring us in well into how you started all of this and how you got your business going. And I believe you build boards now as well, right? You've gone a little bit beyond just fixing.
Yeah. I mean, like we were building, we were cutting sups in half, and at first, and then there was my good buddy John Bridle out here, and Brad McCallum later. They're kind of like where there's a crew of us down here that are, we're tight. We've been doing this for years, and John and I were like, okay, man, we're gonna save money, right? And we're gonna fix our own. We're gonna make our own boards, and that would have been, like 5 years ago. And it was just for us, really, like it was just like we can do this, and there's really nothing to these things. It's a bar of soap, how difficult can it be? And to a degree that's still true. It's not rocket science, but like anything, there's some do's and don'ts for sure that a person learns along the way. Making something light is pretty easy, and making something heavy is pretty easy. Making something light and strong, that's difficult. Yeah. So yeah, played with a bunch of different shapes. I've probably made 30 boards now. Noah has a couple. Tom's got some like foils, I think. Maybe. Yeah, because I started making the foils too, and I worked with actually the engineering program here. This was just after the Tacoma and Go foils first came out, and then again I was going to save money and make my own stuff. Like I wish I had that the original. Like, I'll send a picture back to you guys. It'll be funny. You can use it for something, I'm sure. And worked with the Camosun engineering program and did like what's called a capstone project, where I project managed and mentored this group of really smart engineering students, and they helped me develop my own modular foil setup system, which
cool.
Again was like incredibly educational, not just through them, but through me, through the project managed part of things. I had a chance to actually really review all of the mistakes and all the things that I had done until that point in time, to be able to present it and hear like the options. Like it's like coming up with good questions, and we were able to answer a lot of those then. So that kind of led in, was really the big, that really kicked things in, because if I could make a hydrofoil by hand, through composite, utilizing different things, and fixing a surfboard is pretty darn easy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the building foils and fixing foils is a whole different level, a whole different dimension. And when you start talking about making things light and strong, that's really where, you can really differentiate between different build techniques. And I think realistically speaking, if you really want to build something light and strong that's a foil, you need just tooling that's not realistic for most people to have in their houses. And they can't really do that. However, I do think boards is very doable. So do you want to tell us kind of a little bit how do you build your boards? Like, what is your process when you build a board?
Well, it depends on what I'm making, and like I'm a kind of an experimenter too. So, I've tried a lot of different techniques. There's different sandwich techniques. For somebody who doesn't know what a sandwich is, I know you guys do. I happen to have this cross section of a board that I don't know if we can actually see. Can you guys, is that focused well?
Yeah, we can see.
So you got carbon on the outer layer, you've got Divinycell, then you got a layer of glass between that and the foam, and then you've got EPS. And so that's the foam that's used nowadays. This specific construction, this is an old Mike's Lab board. I converted from one of those old kite race boards to a wing board, which worked okay. But but then in other ways it was not so okay. We could talk about that later, and one of the things about learning about the importance of rocker when you're building these boards. But we tried at first kind of using what we had, and because there was anybody who was worth their salt had like a polyester surfboard blank kicking around, and early in there wasn't really an understanding to what we were doing, and so a lot of what was happening was guys were making the boards based upon a surfboard profile.
Yeah. So I'm just going to take a little parentheses on this, just because I know people are going to be listening in and didn't really see what you just showed us. And basically what Marty was just showing is a pretty modern, kind of like up to date, how you'd build a wing board today. And basically what you're seeing in a sandwich construction is that you have an outer layer that's either carbon or fiberglass or Kevlar sometimes. Then you have a very thin layer of very high density foam, which is what the Divinycell that Marty was talking about. And the idea of that foam is to be able to make a really impact resistant skin without having to have a really thick fiberglass layer or a really thick carbon layer, and kind of help dent prevention and stiffness without having to add a bunch of fiberglass or carbon. Yeah. After that, you have another layer of fiberglass, and then you go down to a really kind of lightweight, low density foam, which is your EPS, and that'll give you volume. Basically, that'll give you the thickness of the board that you want and how much foam you need. And because the boards end up being so thick, especially wing boards, if you look at a cross section like Marty is showing us now, there's almost no fiberglass. There's almost no carbon in the thickness. You have these super thin layers on the outside, and it still ends up being something that's super stiff and super strong because of this really smart use of materials. And as Marty's saying, in the beginning, the early wing boards were not built like that. They were just built like surfboards with reinforced tracks. And it was basically just EPS, low density foam with a fairly thick fiberglass layer to make it dent resistant. So they were quite heavy and they weren't very stiff, and that ended up being kind of first gen subfoil boards and wing foil boards and surf foil boards, and after that all of this sandwich technology, which I believe comes from windsurfing mostly, kind of showed up in the picture, and that's made huge differences in weights and boards and stiffness and durability and stuff like that.
So one of the things that might be important to understand for people is the reason why also that sandwich technology works. It's one of those things where you have three materials and they add to three, but when you put those three materials together, it adds to five. That by adding those materials, it creates a strength that is greater than the sum of the parts, which is kind of where the miracle of this stuff comes in. But it is not the only way to accomplish a lot of the objectives, and it is difficult. Like I used to kind of make fun of things coming out of the Cobra factory in overseas, and it was like a knockout board, and they don't really, it's just garbage, and like those craftspeople are really good at what they do. There.
They are. And Cobra, for those that don't know, is a factory that produces basically every production windsurfing board on the market, and a lot of the wing boards, a lot of the kite boards. It's a high-end composites factory in Thailand, I believe.
Yeah, it's in Thailand.
That has been at it for a very long time, and they're actually very, very good at what they do. And you kind of get what you paid for, just like anything, made in Asia or anywhere for that matter. Yeah. You can get shitty constructions and you can get super high-end constructions. It just depends what you pay for.
Well, that's it. And so that, there are things there, a lot are made to spec. And, I know a number of people in the board business and whatever else. And, one of the most important things when they're doing overseas stuff there is having somebody that's doing QA, quality assurance on the product, to make sure that it's being done according to how that they want it to be done.
Absolutely.
Which is one of the things. There was the first generation KT boards or Quattro boards that came out, which were great boards all the way around. I think almost everybody I know is either has one or had one of those. They ran into, it was over COVID there, and they ran into some QA things where the factory used thinner carbon than they were potentially supposed to. And so it was a limited production run, and they were just a bit more fragile than they were supposed to be. All of those have long since been gone on the market, can happen to any of the companies. But the next run of
super
board
light though, which is cool.
Yeah, that's like banana. It's like, what is this? Like, and still really good boards. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them. So I don't want to sound like I'm making a sort of a diss, because I'm not. And then the next run of boards, they went with like thicker carbon, and it's a little bit, the boards are a little bit heavier, but they're way stronger. And I think that's where a lot of like that search for the lightness only goes so far until it rebounds back and people start getting, that proper sort of like value and durability intersect,
Totally. And it's a super, super fine line. Like I'm working on a huge composites project myself right now. And through it, I've kind of learned how to do the calculations on all this kind of stuff, like actually how much fiberglass or carbon or whatever you need, how much thickness, blah, blah, blah. And it's really, the skin plays such a minimal role in strength in reality in all of this. Like it's really the geometry that does it. So you can have a board like those first generation Quattros, which is structurally way strong enough. But the skin is so thin that you just puncture it because there's almost nothing there. And if you add just one more little layer, which doesn't add that much weight, you have something that's not bomb-proof, but really a lot more solid.
Yeah.
So dialing in construction is a huge thing for board making, for sure.
Yeah. So, back to the question about how do I start making boards? Well, the first thing is finding out what the objective is. What do I want to do? Am I making this for like a prone surfing board? Am I making this as a SUP surfing board? Am I making this as a light wind winging board? Am I making this as an all around winging board? Am I making this as a sinker winging board? Et cetera, et cetera. And that's going to give me a lot of, the direction on where I'm going to go to. And you've got these boards where it kind of really, it's a generalization, but it only really matters in the light winds. Like if you have enough wind, you can fly most anything to a degree of proficiency. And of course, if you're in really high winds and you have a big SUP, well, then you've got problems because it's going to get blown around all over the place. And, and likewise going the other way there. But really that's where, you run into the lower ranges where it becomes challenging to, I don't know, challenging. It becomes one of the things that design features really come into play, like, sharp edges and all sorts of things like that. And also, depending upon where you, for me, where I plan on using the board, so if I'm going to be up the coast where there's, blast rock and all sorts of, like really, really challenging launch spots or places I'm going to come in and I'm probably going to trip over myself and land on my rails. Like I'm going to want to use like a Spectra carbon blend on the rails or an Enegger carbon blend on the rails or something like that, because as far as the materials goes, like if I were to put carbon on there, it would be lighter and cheaper for sure. But the second that I ding the rail, all of a sudden that EPS foam is taken in water, and now I've lost all the weight savings that there was anyways. So that's a
good way to look at it.
So it's like you can only, like I'm really hard on my gear. Like there's no question about it. Like, I make boards that I can just chuck around. And I think you probably seen me at the beach, Luke, a couple times and maybe like, oh my God, what's he doing? But I make my boards like that so that I don't have to worry about it, and because I'm making them based upon my needs, on that there. But yeah, that would be sort of how I start the process. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, no,
yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good way to do it.
We should, before moving on too far, does anybody have any questions at this phase of the game? We got some people here with us that are riding your gear, which is actually pretty cool.
That's funny.
Yeah. Any quick questions halfway? Hey, Noah, go on in.
Hey, Marty, I'm having a great time riding. I got two of your boards. I got two of your boards now. Looking forward to hopefully plugging the gap like we were talking, and I can have a full-on Chomik quiver. So yeah, my question is, Marty, are you taking commissions at the moment? Are you making custom boards for people?
I mean, I can. You know, if somebody were to approach me and say, I'm looking at this and I'm looking at this, it's something I can do. Seasonally, it's difficult for me. And the reason for that is I don't have a lot of shop space. And, while I can move things around in and out there, I found that affects quality. Like if I want to make something that's really good, I want to be able to put it, into a proper space where I don't have to move the blank around a lot. I'm not going to have to repair any holes in the blanks. I'm not going to make all these small little mistakes, that accumulate over time. There's not a lot of light in the day right now. It's a challenging time of year for me to do things like that. So I would have to say at the moment, not really, but I'm like, I listen to anything, right? If somebody has any kind of a reasonable idea in any way, and even unreasonable ideas, I'll like, let's hear it, so, yeah. Why, what do you got? What are we doing?
Oh, Noah's thinking.
I saw
that. He's thinking about a new board, I think. That's an interesting point you're making about kind of manipulating stuff and having the right space to do it. And I think for people that are going into thinking about a home build, that's something that's really worthwhile considering, because if you're, thinking of building this in your kitchen, you're apart from your, significant other might be getting a little frustrated with you about that, or your roommate or whatnot. But beyond that, you're probably going to need to move it around a lot, and you're going to need to get it out of your way every time you want to eat, and you're going to be living in fiberglass dust. So it's having a space dedicated to making the board and not moving it off the bench so that you don't ding it as you move it around and stuff like that is really a huge plus. And it's not always easy to do, because that space needs to be kind of 100% dedicated to that for you to get good results.
Mm-hmm.
I know taking it to the next level when I'm doing vacuum bagging, which when I'm using the high-end materials like the carbons and the Inegra and the Spectra and that kind of stuff, especially Kevlar, gonna want to use the vacuum bagging, as that needs its own dedicated space, because at the point in time where you laminate things, like you drape the cloth, you wet the cloth out, there's steps in between all these things, but it's the basic way of it for somebody who doesn't know. Then you put like a breather layer that can squeeze out material. Then you put like a layer that will actually allow air to move through, so you create suction in the bag. You have to have enough space to be able to lay that bag out properly. So when you put it in, it's a nice and tidy process, because you can take $1,000 in material and however many hours in time and ruin it. Like if you're tripping
Totally.
over.
So just that was a really good point about kind of breaking down composites, just so people understand what it is, because I think it's there's a lot of mystique about it and people don't really know what composites are. So basically, when you hear carbon or fiberglass or Kevlar or aramid or all of these different fibers, it's basically the cloth that's impregnated or filled with some sort of a resin. So a resin comes out as a liquid, and it then catalyzes and turns into a hard plastic. And you usually have to mix it. You either mix in a catalyzer or curing agent to a specific ratio based on the resin, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of details that aren't that important. But the idea is that you have this liquid that you pour onto a cloth, and then with time and some heat, it turns into a hard plastic. And now you have this really rigid material that your strength is coming from the fibers, and your adhesion between layers and then onto the foam is coming from the epoxy or polyester resin that you're using for it. And what Marty's talking about here is actually the next level of that, where you're trying to use a vacuum bag to remove as much resin as possible and keep the minimum amount of resin possible. So you have as much fibers as possible. Yeah, that's right. And air as well. So that you have this like perfect straight fibers that are stuck super well everywhere. And all you have in your lamination is just fiber and as little resin as possible. And that's what makes it, as strong and as light as possible. And are you infusing as well, Marty, or are you doing a wet layup and putting it in a bag?
No, I don't infuse. I don't have the shop space for it, period. And you want to really know what you're doing with that there. I'm not prepared to learn, to spend what it would take to learn and make that mistake in my backyard. I know a couple guys that have done it here. I'll do different kinds of layups. Like I'll do what I found lately. Do we want to get into this right now? Like the sort of technical component? I'll answer quickly. How about that?
Sure, why not? Let's do it.
I'll do my favorite way to do things right now is to do like wet out on a table.
Yeah.
Then get a roll, like a cardboard roll that the fiberglass cloth would be on, roll it up, and then roll it onto the board. Yeah, that's already been sealed, and and then vacuum bagging from there, and I've had really good success with that. Every step of the way that I'm minimizing the amount of resin that I use saves weight, and
and cost as well, right?
What's this?
And cost as well, because the resin's expensive.
Yeah, for sure. And then next thing you know, you're sanding off $100 in resin, and you burn through $100 in sandpaper, and you burn through a sander, and there's like
2 weeks
doing this. Yeah. And you start doing it over a period of time, man, it's costly, right? It's costly. So,
we did kind of want to go into a little bit of basic DIY repairs. I guess this could be a good bridge into that. Kind of session savers. You're at the beach. When would somebody take a board to you? What would that step be like?
Well, first of all, don't ever try and repair your own board. Send it to me.
Done.
Selfish plug. No, I mean,
wrong.
Nobody, like don't act like, unless somebody's like at risk of losing their foil, which has happened. I know somebody in this room who's lost foils. Where is I? Sorry, I was about to start crying. There's some basic things that you could keep in the bag for sure. Probably the most effective way to stop a crack or a leak in your board is tucked tape, the red stuff.
Yep.
The nightmare to get off. It's like if you take it to, it's the same thing with kites. You can fix kites or wings with that, but when you got to take it to the repair guy, a lot of the repair people won't take it. That adhesive is so hard to get off. So that said, there's better options than that. There is it ACS helicopter tape? You can buy a roll of it. It's fairly expensive, but it's the tape that they use on helicopter blades when they're moving helicopters. It was like originally a military application, and you can buy them in like rolls now. And like I said, it costs a bit more for a roll. It's like $35 or something by the time it's delivered, but it's like it removes easily. You can remove it afterwards. It's got high bondability. It's got high flexibility, and it's clear, so you don't look like a bozo at the beach with tuck tape all over. Like for me, I don't really care. Like I've got 2 kids. I'm all spawned out. I'm not worried. I'm not worried about it. Right? It's like, hey, it looks terrible. Like so.
Scared.
Exactly. And those of us who were there where I'm at understand what that's about. But those are a couple good things for sure to have in your kit. Extra bolts. That's a good one to have. Like have some backup bolts, and try and stay away from just the regular hexagonal bolts there. They're garbage for what we do there. They strip out entirely too easy, and then when you get any sort of seizing to do with the salt water there. They can be really difficult to take out. You have to drill them, and that's a whole other exercise and things. So, having some extra bolts is a good idea. I would say those are kind of the three things that, for the beach, they're good. There's the classic.
Have you tried ding stick? Yeah, I was going to go into ding stick and different epoxies and stuff next.
Yeah. So, if you're using ding stick as a filler and then putting tape over top of that, that's okay. If you're using ding stick to push into a hole, letting it cure and thinking that everything is all right, you're sadly mistaken, because the rigidity of that is of a different rigidity than the board, guaranteed. And so every time there's some movement, there's flex that's happening. And because you have this EPS board that has all of this air in it, when it hits the cold water out here, is that, the air gets denser and it pulls the water in literally like a vacuum. So, yeah, I'm not really like, you do what you have to do. It's like ding sticks without having a cloth over top of them, or, you're going to get water intrusion, period.
Yeah. I think if you have a sandwich construction on your board,
yeah,
and it hasn't gone through the whole sandwich, then ding stick is a totally fine, just for a session saver, not as a real repair, but really just as a session saver.
Sure.
I'm totally, in my opinion, I'm totally okay with it. I'd much prefer to see Solarez being used though, personally, which is UV cure epoxy.
Yep.
And at that point, again, you still have the issue that Marty is talking about having this big glob of hard stuff in a structure that's meant to flex and move in a cohesive way. But at least you're getting a real seal all around the edges, as opposed to ding stick, which will fill the hole and it probably won't fall out, but it doesn't really seal around the edges. Yeah, so I'm a really big fan of Solarez. They have an epoxy version, they have a polyester version. And it's all you need is a little bit of sunlight. You apply the material on, ideally you sand a little bit beforehand, and then you let it cure. And it can go quite quickly. If you have a lot of sun, you're within like 20 minutes, you're good to go on the water.
Pretty quick, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's an important point there to be made, that there's two different kinds of it. There's the polyester stuff, and then there's the epoxy stuff that, for all intents and purposes, just get the epoxy Solarez, because the polyester is it will dissolve the EPS foam. So if you have EPS foam involved, as soon as that touches it, it will create a big hole in your board, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah, it would be an absolute disaster. I think I normally use I think it was the 105, the epoxy I normally get just from a boating store or something, very similar to Solarez in that sense, but that stuff was pretty good for that.
And it cures when it's wet too. That 105 does.
Yeah, so that's always been kind of nice. What about for those at home that are looking to buy a used board? Is there anything that you would recommend looking out for if there have been repairs done?
I think that there's a number of people I know who've been kind of led down the garden path by reading how easy it is to take up wing foiling, and what size boards they need for the size and this and that. And I'm a big fan of having fun. I believe you can have fun all the way through the process if you get the right stuff. And that
totally agree.
Getting a board that is maybe a little bit less an ego stroke and a little bit more functional. So getting something that has the higher liters, like a really short sup style. I think there's probably a business model. I'm probably going to talk to Sam at Gyro Beach and suggest that she actually have some boards to rent out around Victoria for the summer or whatever, so that, people could rent out a large sup, for 10 sessions, so that they can actually isolate the variables when they're learning a little bit and not have to worry about the stability of the board before they go into buying something, before they even think about buying anything that's going to be their wing board for the next year.
I found that a lot this summer teaching at NitNat. I was working with Marie there at Elevation for a little bit.
Yeah.
The 145, 150, one of our clients had I think a Nash, was a bit shorter. a bit wider, and then I was able to borrow that board and put some other people on it. And it was significant difference for them in that, and just how easier it was to get up, how they could take the instruction and then not spend half the time or 3/4 of the time in the water. So I do like where you're coming at this. Before even knowing what to do, then you got to start to look at to see, what is that best board for me, even for that first couple seasons.
There's a one guy in particular, pretty good surfer out here, and he ended up buying. He's a really light guy. He's like 150 pounds, but he ended up buying like a 45-liter board. And and he was like, he'd never done any, like, but he was like, yeah, man, like, I'm a good surfer, and like, I've been in double overhead surf, and like, he's a pretty good surfer, and I've surfed with him, and he was just really like this. He's getting this board, and I know I'm going to grow out of that something so big. And he spent the first at least 20 sessions walking in, up the beach, whether he made it in like sensibly or, like some sort of, some terrible rescue scenario. It was a real nightmare for the guy. And that's like just the classic thing where it was, I kind of felt bad for the guy, like, you don't want to be like, hey man, I told you, but
yeah,
like,
totally.
How can I help you? Hey, I got a bigger board. In fact, I got 3. Come get it. Like I have, and I have boards around that I just lend people. Just come get the big board. Like it's
totally.
Here.
I think that's a pretty extreme example, but like the really classic example that you see a lot is people not taking lessons, not really having done much wind sports. Or even worse, people that are coming at it from a wind sport background.
Yeah.
So they're already a proficient, kite surfer or windsurfer, and they're like, oh, I got this, no problem. I'm just gonna start with a board that's, my weight plus 10 liters or 15 liters because I'm not gonna grow out of that. Yeah. Well, that's a great idea if you already know how to foil, and you already know how to kite foil, and you already know how to wind foil, and you already have a super good base surfing, and you have really consistent wind direction, really consistent conditions that you can go out every day. Yeah, that's a great plan. But the reality is that for 99% of people, they don't have most, if not all of those variables when they get into it. And so getting a big board like Marty's talking about is a huge, huge help. And I personally, even though I had basically all of those variables, I started on a 7-foot long, 150 or 160 liter subfoil board. Yeah, and I'm like, 70 kilos.
Are you being truthful about that 70 kilos, Tom?
What was that, sir? I didn't hear, Marty.
Are you being truthful about that 70 kilos, or?
I was at the time. I'm closer to 75 now, unfortunately. But yeah, but even in my even at 75 kilos or even at 80, whatever, that's still a huge board. Yeah. And I was stoked on having that because it just made it a joke. You just stand up on the board and everything's good, and you figure out, okay, what is this wing thing? Like, how do I make it go forward? How do I do this? And even with quite a few years of windsurf foiling and kite foiling and all that kind of stuff, it's still not that easy at first. And I think the people that get in the most trouble are the kite foilers that come into it having used really tiny foils, really tiny boards, and they're looking for that, light swing weight and high performance and stuff like that. And they just don't have the efficiency to pump up onto foil. So they really need a big wing and a big board. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Yeah. Or you're going to suffer a lot.
What have you seen, Marty? Is that kind of the same thing you've seen with people coming to you? Do you have people coming with little experience, kind of looking to get something, or what have you found so far?
Like, a lot of people just don't, they think that their research on the internet has told them what they need to do, that they know what to do, and that's fine. Like, I don't have any business. I'm not too concerned about being right. Like, for me, and I'm not right a lot of the times. I just like to be helpful to people and see them having a better time of learning something like this, because it's such a positive culture. It's a lot different than the surf culture, which is a bit more like a limited resource, and more for you is less for me. And in the wind community, it isn't that, period. Right? It's more for me is more for you. Like, it's
totally.
Oh, good. So,
yeah.
I want to see people in that sense. I want to see people do well. And I don't buy into the thing that you can't rip with large boards. Like, I know a couple of the guys out here, like Chris Kern was on a large board. He was ripping, like, I don't know, within 5-6 sessions, but he was glad that he did on that. My buddy Brad, who was like McCallum, he was like an Olympic level skier. So he's like one of these bizarro athletes. But he was one of the first adopters of winging coming from kiting because it got too mainstream for him and he hated it. It's kind of funny, but up until last year and even this year, he still uses his stand-up paddleboard for a wingboard, and he rips. So, as far as that, you're not being able to perform on a high level on using bigger gear is a bit of a misnomer too. But yeah, there's people that come and ask me, what kind of boards I think that they should get. I'm going to kind of segue back to, what the question is one of the things to look at there. And like, there's been some pretty radical changes in design over the last year has seen things kind of settle down. It's all about 90, other than the one KT board, which is a bit of a misnomer.
The Jinsu?
Yeah, it's kind of an outlier. So we'll just leave that there. But
sure.
Most of the other boards are 95% sort of the same. Coming into the years before that, there was a lot of changes that were happening with some kind of radical designs, and then some other designs that sort of ended up being a bit more like the classic design of what we go with now. And that's fine, because when you're learning, it's, you can make a lot of things work, really. But one of the big things is understanding, understanding, making sure that you have a solid track in place. Because when they first started doing a lot of these things, they were like companies, and there was some big name companies that were like, they would have like an inch thick of really high density foam that was like a square that they dropped, routed it in and dropped it into the foam and put some glass over top of that, and off to the races you go. And that's fine and dandy until you hit anything. And next thing you know, now you've cracked that. And you may not actually even see the crack that happens right there, but now you've delaminated something inside of the board right there. And I saw the first year that we were out there, maybe the second year, there was foils that were getting ripped out of boards, kind of like it was happening, and nowadays they pretty much understand what works and what doesn't. So, one of the things to look at is to hook a foil onto the board itself. So as you would be, flipping it upside down so that, of course, the deck of the board is on the ground and the foil is up in the air. And believe it or not, reinforcing that board with your feet and rocking it back and forth to see if there's any movement in the tracks. And that right there can save you, like, depending on what kind of foil you have, some foils will sink. Some foils will go to the bottom. So, never mind the repair cost of getting that repaired. Losing, $2,000 in we shouldn't. We're not supposed to talk about numbers. Are we here? Losing expensive
cost.
Yeah, expensive foiling gear is not a good time. Not a good time. So,
no,
I think that's probably the most important thing to look at.
Okay.
We're lucky in a saltwater environment here in the sense that when water gets wicked in and breathes out and dries, it will leave salt crystals. So you'll get little wheat marks, and you'll see where there's salt that's left on a board. And that will tell you where a board's leaking, because it can just sometimes be just little pimples, which are easy to fix, but that will still bring water into your board. So making sure that you actually get a board that's like, when you buy it, it's been taken indoors and warmed up, at least, like not heated, so it's going to create a problem like of delamination, but like warmed up to see if you have any weeping that's happening out. Paying special attention to like sharp edges. So like you can see my board there. as the sharp edges at the back right there. Classic leak spots. Those are spots that are, should be kept, keep an eye out for those spots. They often get over sanded. Yeah, they get over sanded. They're challenging to lay up, if they're in our factory sense there, especially if you get on the corners where there's the complex curves. I find I fix a lot of those kind of leaks right out of the factories. They're also, focal points for impacts. So instead of having something that's, spread out over a larger area, it hits that part right there. And there's a lot of force that will hit right there. And, you can get little leaks from there. Paying, attention to that. And then I think the next one that kind of comes out to mind is to make sure that you're going through the board to make sure there isn't any delamination. Because that, like the delamination is for those that don't know, is when the glass gets separated from the foam. Yeah, so that can happen from a few things. That can happen over time and weight, pushing on something eventually, and eventually it gets pushed in far enough that it just wants to rebound back when you're dealing with like a carbon, or something like that doesn't particularly like to bend. More often than not, you're going to get delamination because there's water in the board. And those things can be they can be fixed, but it can be costly, and usually it's a bit incomplete because once you get water in these DPS boards there on any level there, it's very difficult to get it out, if at all impossible. Like taking on the whole, and then they breathe. So what happens is the water gets spread throughout the board and turns into vapor, and then you get expansion, diurnal contraction, and expansion that happens in the board, and it's just like it's breathing, and that will cause delamination. So one of them is kind of an indicator of a larger problem usually.
And the other place to really look out for, apart from the hard edges like Marty's describing, is often the nose, the tail, and the rails of the board, because those are kind of focal points for impacts. And then compounded, if you have these like really thin noses or really thin tails with really hard edges, those are just magnets for dings. Kind of like what Marty's pointing out on his board, like really thin
I should have mentioned that.
through the noise.
You're right. And these areas up all and around and in through here, I've got a foam pad. So when I up here, that helps me to kind of push it when I'm in like a ninja, eh?
You're quick.
Yeah, that was Marty's board slipping there, but he caught it.
That gives me a chance to push against something, but it also allows me to put the board upside down and not worry about it. This particular one here too, I've got Spectra, which is like Amsteel or Dyneema. It's stronger than steel. That's like a Spectra carbon weave, so it's really impact resistant. And probably of all the places that there is dings, that's where they're going to happen, in and around there. So I'm not sure who mentioned that, but that's for sure the obvious. Yeah.
Okay. And what about foil placement? Like I know that's changed as well. Like the V1s and stuff, they started and you could move, the track was further back and they moved it further forward. I know I learned on a buddy's board, it was a 145 liter, but the track was so far forward, I couldn't bring the foil back enough and it would just spin like a top. So did you guys play with that as well as you were starting out and then to now? Like where you put your track?
Absolutely. That's changed a lot. They're to the point where there's boards that are like first generation are oftentimes incompatible with what we do, because you have the different kinds of foils, and without getting into too much of it, higher aspect foils lift like this with speed, whereas the lower aspect foils, which were the first generation, had heavy lift that you could kind of jump and they would like lift vertically, and you actually needed nose on the board to control that lift. You had to keep the nose down, whereas the current generation of foils generally is like you're getting speed like this and it's lifting up like this. You have less lift. And so you need to have the tracks further forward. Yeah.
Okay.
So so people that can't see what Marty's doing with his hands, basically the high aspect foils is a more progressive lift. So as you pick up speed, the lift kind of progressively gets higher. And the earlier generation, lower aspect foils that are really thick, the second that you start moving at a high enough speed, all of a sudden it's like, boop, this foil wants to just jump up and fly straight up. And it's kind of a all or nothing situation. So with the higher aspect foils like today, that's why we're seeing a lot of the newer boards have foils further forward. And there's also a lot of standardization and kind of lift points for foils. In the beginning, we had some companies that had super front foot heavy foils and others with super back foot heavy foils, and everybody's kind of moving towards a relatively balanced front and back foot now. So some tracks are moving backwards, some are moving forwards, but everybody's kind of moving in a similar direction, which is great because it means that you can use more foils on more different boards.
Hey, nice Takuma.
Yeah, Takuma.
Yeah. What about board shapes and lengths and stuff? That's another kind of cool question I was curious about.
Well, I know when we first started out there, hull speed was a pretty big thing, and I think that it still is a big factor. Balanced, carefully with size on the board now. I like about a 411 long board personally with more volume.
Okay.
And I used to go with something that was a bit wider, and now I'm going to things that are a little bit narrower for speed. And it really does make a difference. I'm finding that I don't need the length on that as much as I do the volume, up this way to a point.
Okay.
The volume as far as like the thickness. That's what I'm going for these days. Part of it depends on where you're going to be doing your things. Like if you're in cold water, and you're in like open ocean, cold water, lots of currents, AKA South Island or something like that. And you can get some significant winds and big swells, and you don't want to be floating around on a sinker. It's not a good option. But if you're in the Bahamas, it's probably a pretty good option.
That's not bad.
No?
I actually rode my sinker a lot more back in Montreal than I do here now.
Well, there you go.
In warmer water. Yeah, just
look
because
at
we
that.
had more wind. But
In Montreal, was it still fairly warm water?
Oh no, definitely not. And I mean, I think it's a rider level thing more than a volume thing, to be honest. And for most people, kind of what I suggest to people usually when they're looking at board sizing is don't think about a sinker board until you're making a solid 90% of your transitions. Yeah. Until that point, it's just not worth your time. Like the gains in performance that you're going to get, and sure, it's more fun to ride. Sure, it's going to maybe, have lower swing weight and be a little bit more reactive and whatnot. But it's just not worth the energy that it's going to take to restart that thing every time. And if you're riding in kind of marginal conditions, or if you're riding in gusty conditions, especially, you really need to be quick to kind of pump really dynamically and pop up on the foil. Otherwise, you're just sitting in the water the whole time, or you're exhausted, or both. So, I think that it's definitely doable on a sinker board, but you do need to have a pretty good level, and ideally, in a decent amount of wind as well. That definitely doesn't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think, Marty from Strong there was playing around at Knit Nat this summer, and he was on something super tiny and very light wind. And even he was saying, wow, this is a sinker and super light wind is super tough. But I'm 150 pounds. I got myself down to about a 72 liter. I'm riding 2022 KT, that 72 liter. Yep. And I find that's about as small as I can get while coming in and next to no wind and floating. I do like a floater when it's cold. I don't at least then I can sit on it and my feet can dangle over or something, or I can paddle in and be fairly dry. But I tried a 60 and it was fine, but it's just a little smaller. And if you are wanting to stay warmer, a little more size is your friend. And it's definitely that. But I wanted to know, because Thomas has made a couple boards as well in Ottawa, and he's kind of looked up and kind of saw your progression, especially with your boards and bottoms. Now, the bottom shape of the boards, that stuff has changed quite a bit as well. And we've seen some different kinds of tails. And then even the new Fanatics are going with that kind of hard kind of edge like you have in the board you just showed us.
Yeah.
Compared to that kind of step tail, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the step tail is for the waves, and there was a real function to it, because they had these huge like chopped up like downwind boards on Hawaii. And so that was like just an idea that they had, basically. Like, I think it was Kai Lenny and was with Alex Aguirre and from GoFoil, and then they chopped the board in half or whatever, and then we're like, well, hey, what if we just cut this little section out right here, and then and cut that section out, and it ended up becoming sort of like a defining sort of design and stuff. There's a lot of different people who like different things. There's definitely a function to that if you're in tightly packed waves, with different kinds of intervals. And if you're really into pumping when you're coming off of the, steep waves, like, it makes a difference, having that cutout tail. But it also doesn't give the same amount of push and lift that you get having the kind of tail that's just the straight back on that one. And so now that things have moved more, they've swung more to the medium high aspect. A lot of companies are finding having that really sharp edge at the back just gives a really good edge release, right?
Okay.
And, like, coming from surfboard design, like, I didn't know this for a long time, but like, having a rounded rail actually holds the board to the water, and so when you look at a surfboard, you'll see round rails, and here's where the magic comes in with the shaper. It's where they start bringing in that hard edge, in relation to the fins in the back of the board, because that's what gives the board its edge release, right? And so it's pretty neat now to look with that on different surfboards with my eye now as I come through. I can kind of get into they're like an engineer, and I'm kind of reverse engineering what their thinking is and what they're trying to accomplish. It's pretty neat. That said, it makes a difference, with these wingboards having the sharp edges that's at the back. I like it. For me, I find that I do tend to go with a bit more volume, and when I push on that back tail, there's just that bit of extra volume that will like help me lift up, and I can feel it. I can feel the difference. Okay.
What about flat bottom versus double, triple, quad concaves?
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of variations in that as well.
I think I said it at the beginning there. I think a lot of this stuff matters in really light winds.
Okay.
I like a double concave. And the reason I like that is because on these squirrely, tiny little boards, it helps to give the board a little bit of direction. Like, it's, it's like the channels give it a little bit more. But, I've owned like a lot of different boards from different companies, and I've made a lot of them. And honestly, the difference between, a double concave all the way through and a flat board is like it's negligible, if at all noticeable.
Okay.
I think a lot of it's marketing, and maybe there is like a 2 or 3% difference, but like when you make your
you have to spend. Yeah. You have to spend a lot of time on it to feel the differences, and I see what you're saying.
Yeah. And then, like, don't forget, like, the more hard edges that you have, the more chances of having leaks in your board. Right. So some of the bottom concaves and bottom shapes that you see, and they have all these sharp edges all the way along there. Well, every time there's that sharp edge, if it hits a rock, you're going to leak. So,
okay. No, that's a good point.
Yeah. These are things that I see, right? Because when I'm fixing boards and they're coming through, it's like I can see the little spots that I know. I know now when that board comes in, I'm looking there and I'm looking there and I'm looking there,
Because you were doing all of So for those at home and those who aren't from Vancouver Island, there's a KT dealer, Jesse, Dirty Mermaid Water Sports up in Euclid. You were fixing a lot of his warranty boards, right?
Yeah, I did a bunch of them. Yeah, that was
Mhm.
that was great. And yeah, Jesse Ripper, good guy.
Yep.
Doing really good with Dirty Mermaid there too, which is great. But yeah, he brought a bunch of boards to me. Yeah, and
Okay.
it was 5, 6, 7 of those or something.
Oh, nice. Yeah, because I think you had. I saw one of them. I dropped one off for you I think it was this summer that you were repairing and stuff. And another question I had actually was deck pads. They've changed quite a bit. The first version of the board that I have is a fairly aggressive deck pad. There are a bunch of different kinds. What are your thoughts on that, and which ones do you like the best?
Well, I've seen them getting thinner, like know, and using like companies trying to shave grams of weight. And it seems insignificant, but when you're saving 25 grams here and 25 grams there and 25 grams there, all the way through, then at the end, you've saved a pound on a board, which is like, can take it from feeling kind of like a really light board to feeling like not a light board, like that's how much different the pound can take.
Yep.
So, I think they're trying to sort of find the magic as to like, what offers that intersect between the nice cushiony feel with the comfortability and also maybe some durability, with like how much can you get away with? Like how much will the market bear?
Okay.
That, makes any sense there. And also like, things being a bit more refined now, like here, I got a good example right here.
Sure.
Fixing the guy's board, Greg Salmon. And this was he got this board, which was one of the original downwind boards that was being made by Johnson, the shaper, back there. And so it's like, it's really thick, and it also has the cutout tail. This is like a 2-year-old downwind design. Really high-end board. But you look at the deck pad there, and it's got all of this space in the decking. Like how much is somebody going to be using all of that deck padding, in that area? And so if a company wants to think, they know now where people are going to be stepping on their boards based upon the balance point of their board, where can they take material out? And so you'll start to see that a little bit more on some of the boards there. And I think it's good thinking,
Yeah, that's a good point. And for those at home, Marty was just showing us one of the boards he was currently repairing and just checking out that deck pad positioning and how long it is, and just to know what kind of to look out for.
Nice. And when would you recommend for somebody to bring in a board to you as opposed to just doing kind of a small repair on it themselves?
Well, I mean, that's like, there's no real concrete answer on that. If you've got like anything structural around the like, first and foremost, if you see anything that's like an open wound where there's open foam, then you're probably better off bringing it to somebody like, a repair person, because you're going to involve, like, there's more material that's involved. There's more of a chance of you melting the foam through using too much product. There's more chance of you bringing water into your board and ruining your board. There's obvious things like, if you see that your fin boxes or your mass tracks are cracking, or you see sometimes you can see like a little paint line, and it's like that paint line, you can see that it kind of look like it's cracking. Definitely make sure you bring it in to somebody who has an idea there, or else you might just lose your foil, or it could just crack at you when you're moving at high speeds and then you get hurt, so yeah, I mean, like you can get by using tape and stuffing dingo in and and whatever else there, but there's like and by all means, I use tape when I'm out in there. I certainly don't get out of the water, or stop my session because there's something that I'm not going to get out of the water for that. I'll do quick fixes, but like when you invest a bit of money into a board, like you might want to keep it up as well too, and keep the value up on it, and so taking it to somebody who does it as an actual business might not be a bad idea. It keeps the repair value high, keeps it high.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really? Yeah. So I think as a short resume, we can kind of tell people basically if you have any sort of, cracking in the fiberglass or in the carbon or whatever around the foil box, definitely bring it into a shop to take a look at it, or to a repair person to take a look at it. Yeah. And if you have any sort of,
well, sorry, I forgot to mention that, because there's lots of leaks around handles.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. And then if you have any sort of impact that you can see foam through, then definitely bring it into the shop or into a repair person. And for other stuff, it can be more or less important to get it done right away, but it's really important to keep the water out of the board, as Marty was talking about before.
I got another one after that one there. Back in the old surf days, there used to be a thing where when you would have delaminations, where there was like inject the resin in and just have like a weight, to hold it down or whatever, and that worked.
That's a great one.
Back in the day, it worked with polyester foam and polyester resin. But if you do that nowadays, what you'll do is you'll get an exothermic reaction where the epoxy starts getting there's heat created through the reaction. It's stoichiometric, and there's heat created, and if it doesn't have a chance to escape, as in there's like a big globule of it, it'll get so hot it'll melt the core of your board. Don't do that.
So don't do that.
No injection.
Yeah. The one parentheses on the injection is Gorilla Glue, and I don't know if you use this at all, Marty, or not. Yeah. But Gorilla Glue is basically a foaming polyurethane glue, and you can inject it into anything basically, and it activates with moisture, so it actually soaks up any moisture that's in that area, and it just turns into a high density foam. So there's no exotherm problem that like Marty is talking about, and it can be a big help in that kind of situation.
On that one there, because Gorilla Glue will exotherm if there's enough of it. And one of the challenges you get with Gorilla Glue is that you can actually change the shape of your board.
Yes, that's true.
Too much in, right? Because it's it's expanding, and I've done that on my own stuff. Never anybody else is there, but I've done that. And I have created too much heat, like doing it when it was hot outside, 5 degrees, and then use a lot of Gorilla Foam, doing a foil box actually, and then it just melted. It melted the foam. So
good to know.
Not as significant as with epoxy, but yeah.
Okay, no, that's a good point. And Thomas from Otto just mentioned that also that repair guys have materials on hand. So most people don't have a lot of materials on hand, and maybe you going to buy the stuff, buying fiberglass, buying your epoxy, buying this, buying that. The repair may actually come out to closer or even cheaper, or then at least you're going to get a good quality repair as well, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yep. Now I want to know, because I'm curious, if you want to spend, we've been on here for a little over an hour. Those early foils that you made, do you want to chat about them and chat about the evolution of that? I would be stoked to find out more about how you guys started.
Oh, Tom, do you still have some of those old foils that I sent you guys out there? I don't. I wish I just had that one in particular. But I can talk a little bit about one of these designs that I made. I found this one, and I was like, "Oh, this is a good one. This is a good one."
Okay.
At the point in time when I made this was like a really small, foil, like really small, and look, you guys, it doesn't have to be huge. And so I thought, I was like, okay, you get a big curve in a foil here, and that curve helps to create lift through the spectrum when you're carving, because you're going to have more area this way if you have a curve that's lifting, right? And so why not have just a vertical step like this? So you're going to have some vertical lift that's coming up from this right here while you're banking a turn. You get all of the stability from having a flat foil section, on the bottom, and it looks cool. And I had a lot of fun with this one, actually. I had to fix it a few times or whatever, but one of the emerging properties that came from this is the one that I ended up developing with Caboose in college. And I got a mold out of it and everything. And by the time that was done, foils had way changed, and like doing what I was doing was no longer relevant. But one of the fun things about this one is it actually, when I would breach and come out of the water, I could actually skim the surface of the water, because it would, like there would be like an air pocket here, and I could actually ride that on top of the water and then jump back down on it. And I was like I thought it was like, well, that was just the freakiest thing that ever happened, never happened again. And I was actually able to replicate that and like do that as kind of like a move, eh? And that was
cool.
And I thought, man, this is the next big thing. There, people are going to be knocking on my door, man, and I'm going to get somebody's going to make this, and I'm going to get a free gear, and it's going to be awesome.
It'll be over.
None of it happened. But, yeah, we were using 3/4 inch by 1 inch aluminum angle bar of different grades, bending all sorts of fuselages, and yeah, I mean, that's almost like a whole podcast into itself.
Yeah, I was thinking if you want to come back on, we could talk about that, because it's and Thomas, and you've made some as well. I think Thomas was playing with some of them, and that would be a fascinating chat to go through. But we could definitely have you back on, and we could chat that for sure.
When we had like Thomas and the crew there, like that's how we originally met. And we had a thing where we had a meeting, and there was a whole crew of guys that were like, engineers and the whole thing with you guys there. And I was like, listen, just go get an Axis fuselage. Like, just get an Axis fuselage. If you're going to do this, don't even bother with anything else, because I'd spent years trying to like fabricate and machine and get somebody to make and machine this thing in there. And it was like all along, there was this perfectly made fuselage that made it perfectly easy with right angles and the whole thing. And I don't know if you guys ever followed up on that. But.
Well, Marty, I want to say thanks for joining. Thanks for sharing some of that knowledge. People know how to get a hold of you.
Yeah.
And looking forward to seeing you again this summer.
Yeah.
When I rip back on the island, and hopefully you guys get some wins soon there. I came back for Christmas out in the East Coast, and I almost got one session with Thomas here in Ottawa.
Well, yeah.
It was too cold, so we ended up just sitting in the car, had some food, and filmed our one buddy with a dry suit, and we were just like chomping at the bit. And I guess everything just got put away, so I cracked up the fat bike there yesterday and got to get doing some of that stuff. But there was a little bit of a storm that rolled through Vic this weekend. My brother messaged me, and he went out to Island View, I think. Did you get out? Or
no, I for sure. Yeah, I got out. I was out a couple times. One of them was right off Clover Point on the southeaster, and the first day it turned into probably, it was getting up into the 50 knot thing there, and we thought we were going to die. And there was like head high shore pound that was just grinding into the beach with logs, and it was like a death defying move to get out of the water. And then the next day, next morning, it had settled down, and it was more like in the 30s, which when you compare 40 knots to 30 knots, it's like
it's huge.
Yeah, it's a really easy, at that point in time there. And Chris Kern and I, and we had just a dream session, man. There was Chris Kern and I and Mark Soodle, and
nice.
It was really good, man.
Nice.
The Stoke is we're having so much fun, and I know we all are, like, coming from all these different backgrounds and windsurfing and kiting, and to arrive where we are in this, and just like the Stoke is real, man. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm. I found that as soon as the sport came out, I was like, this will be an opportunity for a lot of us to get and to see like an evolution of an entire sport. I miss some of the other sports. So to be able to see that, and to be able to play in all the versions, and then watch, and then have you guys kind of get super into technical with this. And that is a huge thing, especially with wind sports. And I find with rock climbing and stuff as well, as it's such an inclusive community. Yeah. Especially out on the water and stuff. Like, we're not necessarily stealing anything away from anybody, because there's ample space. You're always especially on the foil, right? You're always surfing. Like, even at Nitnat, sometimes you can even surf for a second or two on like a 2-foot little section, and you're like, I don't know, it just lights you up. It lights everybody else up. So that's the whole thing. Absolutely. We'll have you back on, because I think all of us want to talk foils and and see some of those older prototypes if you got
You know what?
some.
I'll put some together there just as we could do a quick little like tour through the home fabrication of foils.
Wait, yeah, no, I think that'd be
you're
awesome.
gonna laugh, man, when you see this thing. It's like, yeah, it's pretty good, pretty good.
No, man, it's that's history.
It's history. It's like
It's history.
like the Wright brothers flying the airplane kind of thing.
So, Marty, if anybody's looking to get a board repaired or fixed, what's the easiest way for them to get hold of you?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook there. I'm Marty Man, which was like that was a nickname of mine when I was a lot younger there. And so you can contact me through there. If you forget about that or you're not on Facebook, you could call any of the surf shops in town. That would be the Gyro Beach Board Shop, Coastline, or the Seek and Surf in Souk. And they have my number and contact. I'm kind of like the place that they send people to. Or you can email me, South Island Comp, as in composite, South Island Comp @gmail.com. And yeah, so yeah, basically the process, I do it paperless. Try to cut down on as much, waste, which there's a lot of waste in this industry. It's hard to reconcile being an environmental practitioner that I am professionally. But yeah, I just do that paperless. Somebody takes a picture or a couple pictures of the repair, and then I see it, and that basically gets it started, and then they get it out to me. And like I'm pretty flexible. I don't want people to be out of the water for any amount of time. So if there's no hurry, then I keep something on the back burner. Maybe it costs a little bit less. Maybe they get a bit more work done for the value. But usually I'm about 10 days, somewhere around there. I work pretty hard. I work my full-time job, and then I come home and work on boards. So,
hey, that's not bad.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Well, hey, Marty, thanks a lot, man, and we'll chat soon with you.
All right, take care. See ya.
You too. Bye. Thanks for joining Tom and I on this episode. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.